I wore my favorite navy suit, the one I'd bought 5 years ago when Arthur and I were scouting offices, eating cheap noodles out of styrofoam bowls, dreaming about what our company could become. Today, I thought I'd finally be stepping into the role we had once joked I was already doing. Chief Operating Officer. We'd grown from a dingy co-working space with one flickering light and a shared Wi-Fi password scribbled on a sticky note to a sleek downtown tower with glass walls and espresso machines. And I was ready. Ready for the title to match the labor. Ready to stand in front of my peers, not as the silent backbone of the company, but as its formalized leader. I'd spent the weekend rehearsing my reaction. Understated pride, perhaps a humble nod, maybe a soft smile and a simple, "Thank you." I didn't need a plaque, just recognition. The email came late last night. Subject: 9 a.m. alignment, executive conference room. Short, no agenda, no context. But I knew, or at least I thought I did. I'd been laying the groundwork for this conversation for months. Longer hours, strategic memos, mentoring new hires while bridging the gap between tech and operations. Arthur had seen it all. We'd shared so many late nights troubleshooting code and budgeting forecasts, arguing gently over coffee stains and whiteboard scrawls. He had smiled at me just last week and said, "Soon, Em, it's coming." So I arrived early. The conference room was still cold from the night before. I chose the seat halfway down the table, centered but modest. I polished my glasses, lined up my notebook and pen, and sipped the weak conference room coffee like it was a celebratory cappuccino. I even caught myself smiling. Arthur walked in at 9:03. No tie, no laptop, just him and his serious face. Behind him, Dylan, our new CFO, whose spreadsheets were always perfect, but whose handshake was always limp, and Mia from HR, face tight and polite, carrying a folder. My stomach dropped. The room felt heavier, like someone had shut the windows and vacuumed out the air. Arthur didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table, both hands braced against the back of a chair. He didn't smile. "Miranda," he said, "we appreciate everything you've done, but it's time. You are no longer suitable for the company." It felt like a slap. Not just the words, but the ease with which he said them. Like I was a worn-out printer or a supply vendor who failed a background check. "Excuse me?" I said, blinking hard, certain I'd misheard. Mia pushed the folder across the table like a waitress delivering the bill too early. Inside, termination documents, severance offer, NDA. Arthur avoided my eyes. Dylan shifted awkwardly. Cough. Glance at the floor. "We've brought in external leadership," Arthur said. "People with new ideas, new energy." I stared at him. "I am this company," I said. My voice was low but firm. "I bled for this place. I built this place. With you." He finally looked at me. But the man I saw wasn't the Arthur I'd built a company with. It was someone else, cold, clinical. He looked past me, like I was already a memory. "The board voted," he said. I laughed. Just once. A short, bitter exhale. My name was on the Articles of Incorporation. My fingerprints were in the code of our first product. I'd given up relationships, holidays, and entire years of sleep for this. "You can't just erase me," I said. Arthur stepped back. "It's already done." There was a long silence. No one moved. Mia glanced at her watch. I closed the folder slowly. Stood. Smoothed the lapels of my jacket. "Thank you," I said evenly. "For the clarity." I walked out. Not fast, not slow. Past the offices I'd helped design. Past the interns I'd mentored. Past the branding wall with our logo, the one I had sketched on a napkin at a pub over gin and tonic while Arthur ordered nachos. They thought they were cutting dead weight, cleaning house. But what they had done was fire the rightful owner, and they had no idea what they just started. I didn't go home right away. I couldn't. Instead, I drove aimlessly, past the downtown buildings that bore our logo, past coffee shops where I'd held hiring interviews, past the quiet back streets of a city that still felt too full of memories. Eventually, I pulled into the old park near my first apartment, the one I lived in when we were just starting out. I sat in the car as the rain tapped against the windshield, each drop like a drumbeat against my chest. And I remembered. It wasn't always this cold. 15 years ago, it began in Arthur's basement. Not metaphorically, literally. The basement smelled like damp concrete and mothballs, with one rattling space heater and a wobbly card table we pretended was a workstation. We had one laptop between us, a cracked whiteboard, and a dream. Arthur had the spark, the technical genius. He could code like breathing, pitch ideas with caffeine-fueled brilliance, but he couldn't manage bills or file taxes or schedule a meeting on time to save his life. That was me. I didn't have the spotlight, but I had the blueprint. I took the seed of his idea and mapped out how it could become something real. I remember the night he told me about his legal trouble. We were sitting on that basement floor, eating dollar tacos, and he looked so uncomfortable I thought he was about to confess to murder. It wasn't that serious, just a few lingering legal complications from a failed startup he'd been part of in college. He said he couldn't have his name on anything official. It might cause problems. "I'll register it in my name," I said without hesitation. I didn't even think twice. I trusted him. We were building something together. I filed the LLC. I opened the bank accounts. I handled payroll, insurance, business licenses, office leases. Arthur built the product, sure, but I built the company. Every system, every policy, every hiring pipeline, I designed it. We couldn't afford a lawyer back then, so I studied business law in my free time and drafted our first contracts myself. I was the one who made us scalable, sustainable, legitimate. Arthur always said, "Miranda's the heart." It was his way of deflecting, of charming people into forgetting who really did the grunt work. I didn't mind back then. I believed we were equals. He'd talk about code and vision while I managed logistics and compliance. We laughed about how I was COO in everything but title, even when it was just the two of us. I think about that now. How easily I stepped aside. How naturally I deferred. I thought we were partners. I thought we were building something together. But somewhere along the way, together became Arthur's vision, and I was just the execution, the glue, the assistant in heels. And now he's fired me. Just fired me. 15 years. Gone. With one sentence, "You are no longer suitable for the company." My name is still on the incorporation documents. The original ownership is still mine. But somehow, they convinced themselves I was expendable. Maybe because I never asked for credit. Maybe because I always stayed late, kept things smooth, didn't demand the spotlight. I made sure everyone else looked good. Maybe that was my mistake. But I know something they don't. You can fire a title, you can erase a nameplate, but you can't erase a foundation, and I am the foundation. So I sat in that car, watching the raindrops race each other down the glass, remembering every drafty night in that basement, every coffee-stained budget plan, every spreadsheet I balanced on my knees. I remembered Arthur in his hoodie, smiling at me like we were in this together forever. And I remembered the moment I signed the company into existence, with my name on the line. They thought they ended something today. They thought they pushed me out quietly. But they don't realize yet. This isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of my return. I don't remember falling asleep. But when I woke up, the sun had already dipped low, casting golden lines across my windshield. My neck ached from sleeping in the driver's seat. My throat felt dry. But it was the weight in my chest that hurt the most. The sharp kind, like something valuable had been stolen, and you didn't even notice until you reached for it. I turned the key, engine sputtering back to life, and drove. Not home, somewhere, anywhere that would let me remember without suffocating. As the streets blurred by, I thought back to those early years. Not the romanticized startup version with foosball tables and hustle mugs. The real years. The ones with broken printers, mystery leaks in the ceiling, and clients that screamed because their invoices were off by a decimal point. And who fixed it? Me. I wrote every single internal process. I created the onboarding documents, mapped out the customer journey, handled IT tickets when we couldn't afford tech support. I answered customer complaints at 2 a.m. from my bathtub, laptop perched on the sink. I fixed the copy machine with a butter knife. Once, I unclogged the office bathroom because no one else wanted to get their hands dirty, and our one contractor had just stepped out for lunch. I built the service model. I designed the employee handbook. I invented entire departments that didn't exist and filled in job duties that weren't mine, because if I didn't, no one else would. I was legal, HR, finance, and customer experience, all rolled into one. Arthur would call me the Swiss Army knife, like it was a compliment. And maybe it was. But it also became a way to bury me under the convenience of my reliability. I kept everything running, quietly, efficiently, without drama. I made us look professional before we were. I was the one who made sure we delivered. I was the woman behind the curtain, making sure the show went on while Arthur took the stage. And then there was that day. I remember it too well. We were preparing for our first big investor pitch, the kind of meeting that could get us real money, not just bootstrapped chaos. I stayed up for 3 nights building the presentation deck, double-checking every financial forecast, assembling metrics that Arthur had barely reviewed. I created the visuals, the talking points, the backup materials, the strategic projections. I even picked out his outfit because he didn't want to look too corporate. We stood in that glossy boardroom, me in a blazer with coffee-stained cuffs, him in one of those curated startup hoodies that said, "I'm smart but cool." The investors were all older men with expensive watches and polite smiles. Arthur introduced himself. He spoke in practiced, confident tones about vision and scale. He cracked a joke about bootstrapping from a basement. Laughter, nod. Then he gestured toward me. "And this is Miranda," he said with a dismissive wave. "She runs operations support." Support. Support? I blinked. I smiled, because I'd trained myself to. But something in me twisted. Not co-founder, not COO, not even partner, just support. I remember standing there, watching their eyes flick past me. One of them nodded like I was the office manager. Another didn't even make eye contact. And Arthur didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and it didn't matter, because that moment sealed it. I was always going to be support in his story. Even as I ran every back-end system, kept clients happy, scheduled timelines, reviewed contracts, and caught errors before they became disasters. Publicly, I was a footnote, a convenience, a fixture. Useful, not vital. But I was vital. I was the infrastructure. And the thing about infrastructure? It's invisible until it collapses. They never saw me coming because they never bothered to look. But now, they're going to see. Long before I was called into that room, before Arthur stood across from me and ended everything with a few sterile words. I felt it. It was subtle at first, like a change in the air pressure. A breath held a little too long. You don't realize what it is right away, just that something's off. A missed beat in a familiar song. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. The first came in the form of silence. Meetings I had always attended, weekly alignment calls, roadmap reviews, budget planning sessions, were suddenly happening without me. At first, I assumed it was a scheduling oversight. I messaged Mia in HR, then Dylan in finance. They gave me the same vague response. "Oh, I thought you were looped in already. Must have been a calendar glitch." A glitch. Right. Then came the files. Shared drives I had built, literally named, tagged, and structured by me, began disappearing from my view. Whole folders would vanish or be relabeled with new owners. My access revoked. When I asked about it, I was told they were streamlining access under the new operations schema, a schema I hadn't approved, hadn't even seen. Still, I made excuses. I told myself it was the natural evolution of a growing company, delegation, scaling. It happens, right? But then the delegation became duplication. I found internal memos I didn't write, but that bore my language. training materials with my formatting, my headers, my systems, but stripped of my name. The new staff, the ones brought in under Arthur's recent culture refresh, were being told these frameworks came from central operations, no mention of me. Then came the worst sign of all. It was a Thursday. I remember because the office was unusually quiet, and I had stayed late to update our compliance dashboards for the quarterly audit. I tried to log into my admin console, the one I'd used for years to monitor every internal workflow. Access denied. I tried again. Then again. On the third try, I clicked Forgot Password. The screen blinked once, then displayed a message that made my stomach drop. This account has been deactivated. Contact your system administrator for assistance. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I was the system administrator. Or at least, I used to be. I walked straight to Dylan's office. He looked startled to see me. My admin login's gone, I said. My voice was level, calm, like I was reporting a printer jam. He hesitated, just a beat too long, then smiled awkwardly. Oh yeah, I think it was consolidating some roles. There's been a shift toward new account hierarchies. Who approved that? I asked. His eyes flicked to the side. I think Arthur did, or maybe the consultants. Of course, the consultants. Our new favorite scapegoat for anything unethical or unexplained. I thanked him and left. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine that I didn't touch and opened my personal laptop. I went through our old cloud systems, backup plans, documentation archives. I checked timestamps, metadata, old login credentials, and there it was, clear as day. My work, my workflows, my systems. Now renamed, reattributed, not erased, repurposed. I was being phased out, neatly, strategically, no performance reviews, no conflict, just a quiet revision of the record. I watched my name vanish in real time. A junior analyst named Bryce had been assigned to lead the new vendor integration strategy, a strategy I had built from the ground up. He was presenting it as a new initiative next week. I saw the slide deck. Every chart, every line, mine. And Arthur? He never said a word. I told myself I was being paranoid, that if I just kept showing up, they'd realize what they were doing, that it was all just a miscommunication. Until the moment I saw my name was no longer listed in our team management portal. I wasn't listed as operations lead. I wasn't listed at all. I searched again. Maybe I was in another department? Maybe they'd moved me to strategic projects or executive support. Something temporary, nothing. I wasn't reassigned. I was erased. And the worst part? No one even looked surprised. Not Mia, who offered me awkward smiles and started referring all HR questions to someone else. Not Dylan, who stopped looping me into budget meetings with the excuse, "You're probably swamped with other things." Not Arthur, who looked right through me in the hallway, like I was some well-dressed ghost hovering near the coffee machine. I started to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. Was I imagining this? Was I reading too much into it? Then I remembered something Mia once said, years ago, during a rough hiring cycle. I had asked her how she handled uncomfortable terminations. She'd smiled and said, "The best way to get someone out isn't to fire them. It's to make them think they chose to leave." That line echoed in my head as I sat alone in my office that Friday night, the hallway lights dimmed, my reflection flickering faintly in the glass of the closed conference room door. They weren't firing me, not yet. They were making me disappear. And the Miranda they thought would go quietly? They're about to learn she never really left. By the time they announced the COO position was officially open, I already knew they weren't looking at me. Not really, but I couldn't stop myself from trying. Some part of me, the stubborn, principled part that still believed hard work mattered, refused to sit this one out. If they were going to overlook me, I'd make damn sure they had to do it deliberately. So I went all in. For 2 weeks, I poured myself into the application. I didn't just list qualifications, I constructed a vision, a real, implementable roadmap for the next 5 years of operational growth. Every pain point I'd lived through, every inefficiency I'd silently patched, every redundancy I'd watched balloon into bloat. I addressed them, structured them, solved them. The document was over 30 pages by the time I was done, but not a word was wasted. I mapped out departmental integration strategies, vendor contract redesigns, hybrid work protocols, clean, actionable, and grounded in our data. I even referenced my own work anonymously, hoping the content would speak louder than the name on the file. I didn't want praise. I wanted proof. I wanted to show them what they already had, what they'd been using and eroding without understanding its source. I submitted it on a Friday. No fanfare. Just a short note. Attached. Proposal for COO consideration. Miranda T. And then I waited. Monday came, then Tuesday. No response. Not even a confirmation. By Thursday, I started hearing whispers. Conversations that went quiet when I entered a room. Slack channels I could no longer access. Calendar events labeled Leadership Review that were suddenly private. On Sunday night, I couldn't sleep. I kept telling myself it was nerves, that maybe I'd still get an interview, a meeting, something. Then Monday morning arrived. The email hit inboxes at 9:01 a.m. Subject: announcing our new Chief Operating Officer. I didn't click it right away. I stared at the subject line for a full minute, heart pounding. But I already knew. I opened it. There she was. Mia Keller. Smiling in a professionally lit headshot, dressed in one of her pastel blazers and those pointed heels she never seemed to scuff. Her bio was polished, her list of achievements suspiciously familiar. I scrolled past the intro fluff and found it. A link to her strategic operations proposal. Curiosity, or something more bitter, made me click it. And there it was. My work, my formatting, my section headings, my diagnostic charts, even my phrasing, whole paragraphs lifted word for word from the document I had submitted. Except this version had a new title page, a bright blue one with the words, Reimagining Operational Velocity. A proposal by Mia Keller. She hadn't even tried to hide it. I felt the blood drain from my face. I clicked through slide after slide, watching my work unfold under her name like a grotesque puppet show. Even the examples were mine, references to pilot programs I'd run in Q2, graphs I'd personally pulled from our analytics dashboard. No one had asked, no one had told me. They'd taken everything I'd built and given it to her. And everyone was smiling. I closed my laptop and walked straight to the executive lounge. Mia was there, of course, perched on the edge of a leather chair like she belonged there, like she always had. She was laughing softly at something Dylan said, coffee cup in hand, perfectly composed. When she saw me, her smile didn't fade. It widened. "Miranda," she said, like we were old friends meeting by chance at brunch. "Congratulations are in order, right?" I didn't say a word. I just held up a printed copy of her proposal. My proposal. She looked at it, then at me. No guilt, just mild amusement. "You know," she said, stepping closer, "you really did a phenomenal job putting this together." "You mean I put it together?" She tilted her head, faux thoughtful. "You laid the foundation. I just wrapped it up nicely." I blinked. That's what she thought this was. A presentation. A styling exercise. As if years of work, of living and breathing every operational pulse of this company, could be reduced to a slide deck with prettier fonts and a glossier pitch. "It was never about who did the work," she added, as if that was some kind of absolution. "It's about who gets things noticed." And that's when it hit me. They didn't care who built the engine. They cared who looked good revving it in front of investors. Arthur hadn't even had the decency to face me. He didn't call, didn't send a message, just quietly handed her my legacy with a bow on top. She put her hand gently on my arm. "You're incredible, Miranda. Really. This place wouldn't be here without you." And there it was. The softest knife of all. Past tense. Wouldn't be. Was. I pulled my arm back and walked out. I didn't slam doors. I didn't scream. That's not my style. But I walked straight to the archive server and backed up every document I'd ever touched. Every workflow, every signature, every dated version with my name. Because if they thought they could rewrite history without resistance, if Mia thought she could become the face of a company I built with my bare hands, she has no idea what I've kept in reserve. This story isn't over. I didn't plan a dramatic exit. There was no angry confrontation, no broken glass or raised voice. That wasn't my style. Never had been. Quiet resolve, always. That was the Miranda they liked, until they didn't. I spent most of my final day packing up what little of me remained. My office, once a living archive of our growth, looked like a hotel room that had never really been mine. The framed photo of Arthur and me from our first product launch was already gone. Who took it, I'd never know. The shelves I once kept lined with notes, onboarding binders, and early pitch drafts were bare. Even the small glass vase where I'd kept fresh tulips every Monday, emptied out, as if someone had swept my presents away before I could. I boxed the rest slowly. My favorite mug, a pen with my name engraved, a notebook filled with handwritten strategies that had long been implemented, claimed, and rebranded by others. I was methodical, precise. Even now, I wouldn't leave a mess behind. I didn't cry. I didn't let myself. Instead, I sat for a few minutes and composed a short farewell message. I kept it warm, professional, gracious. To those of you I've had the honor of working alongside, thank you. Building this company from the ground up has been the journey of a lifetime. I'm proud of what we've created, and I'll always carry that with me. Wishing you strength, clarity, and integrity in the road ahead. No shade, no veiled barbs, just the truth. I addressed it to the entire team, triple-checked the list, and hit send. The screen flickered. Error, access denied. You are not authorized to contact this group. I frowned, tried again. This time, just my department. Error. Message blocked by system administrator. I stared at the screen. My own farewell was being censored. I tried sending it directly to 3 close colleagues, people I had mentored for years. Each one came back rejected, blocked. I was no longer permitted to say goodbye. That was when the cold truth set in. This wasn't just an exit. This was an erasure. They had planned for every step. Quietly moved files, reassigned credit, changed titles. Now, they were sealing the door behind me before I had even stepped out. Even my voice had been stripped away. I stood up slowly, slid the farewell note into the folder inside my box of things. Maybe one day I'd send it another way. Maybe not. The walk to the elevator felt longer than usual. Past rows of glass-walled conference rooms I'd once brainstormed in. Past interns who no longer made eye contact. Past the wall of company milestones where I'd once stood, holding a champagne glass at our Series B celebration. It was like walking through a museum curated by someone else. My last stop was the executive floor. I wasn't going to say goodbye. I just wanted a final look. The wall of portraits greeted me near the entrance. Arthur in a deep navy suit, Dylan with his ever-polite smirk, Mia in her newest photo already hung in a gleaming frame. The brass plaque under her face read, Chief Operating Officer, Strategic Innovation and Growth. I looked for my own photo. It wasn't there, not removed, replaced. I felt something stir in me, rage, sadness, betrayal, but mostly confirmation. They had rewritten the narrative. A new story, one in which I never existed. I turned to leave, balancing the box in my arms, when I heard her voice. Leaving already? Mia. Of course. She strolled out of the corner lounge, a fresh espresso in hand, wearing one of her crisp pastel blazers, like she'd stepped out of a leadership magazine cover. She looked rested, composed, powerful. I didn't respond. She glanced at the box in my arms, then at me. Her expression was a carefully controlled blend of politeness and superiority. You know, she said lightly, walking closer, I hope you don't feel overlooked. We all know you were the original scaffolding, but that's the thing about scaffolding. It's meant to be taken down once the structure's solid. I stared at her. She took a sip from her cup. Besides, she added, eyes flicking toward the photo wall, they only photograph those who still matter. The line landed like a slap, not because it hurt, but because it was so meticulously cruel. A final dig, crafted to look like elegance. I didn't flinch, didn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I smiled softly and said, "Funny thing about structures, Mia. Without the foundation, they don't last long." She blinked, but I was already turning away. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. I stepped inside without another glance back. They thought they had locked me out, silenced me. But they'd forgotten something important. I still had the original keys, and I wasn't walking away in defeat. I was stepping back, just enough, to let them make the first crack. Because when it comes, they won't even see it coming. The morning after I left the company, I didn't sleep in. I didn't sob into my pillow or scroll social media searching for comfort. I made coffee, strong and black, and opened my laptop with hands that trembled just enough to make the trackpad difficult. There was one folder I hadn't opened in years, tucked away in a cloud drive I rarely used anymore, behind layers of project archives and old version control files. It was labeled plainly Founding Docs, 2010. I clicked it, and there it was. Everything. The articles of organization, the operating agreement, the EIN registration, bank account authorizations. All of it bearing one name, mine. I read them slowly at first, then again, faster, disbelief giving way to a strange, coiling heat in my chest. My name was everywhere. Miranda Tesler, sole managing member, principal officer, registered agent. No amendment, no addendum, no signature from me surrendering ownership, no legal filing transferring authority to Arthur. Nothing. I leaned back in my chair. All these years, I'd assumed something had changed, that somewhere along the line, Arthur or the board had updated the paperwork, formalized what I had been quietly allowing. But they hadn't. They never filed anything. All this time, I was still the legal owner of the company. And Arthur had been signing contracts, raising funds, onboarding executives, all without the authority to do so. I stared at the documents, the weight of what I was holding pressing down like a storm cloud. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was fraud. By noon, I had an appointment booked with a business attorney, Michael Hayes, recommended by an old client I had helped years ago when his startup was being swallowed by a predatory investor. Michael was known for being methodical, precise, and terrifying in court. I drove to his office, a brick building tucked between two tech firms in the quieter part of downtown. His receptionist greeted me by name and offered tea. I declined. My stomach was a knot. When Michael came out, he looked like someone who hadn't been surprised by anything in 20 years. Gray suit, wire-framed glasses, the kind of confidence that came from watching CEOs sweat on the witness stand. We shook hands, firm, direct. I handed him a slim folder. "I want to know exactly where I stand." He didn't say much as he read, just flipped pages, made notes, occasionally hummed under his breath. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You're not a shareholder, Ms. Tesler. You're the owner." I blinked. "Still." He held up the operating agreement. "As of the last legal filing, yes. And since there's no record of a change and no official ownership transfer, this document still governs the company." I sat there stunned. "All the contracts Arthur's been signing?" I asked. "He's been doing that without my approval." Michael nodded slowly. "Which is very problematic, especially if they involved significant financial obligations. You said there were investor deals?" "Yes. Series C funding, a government innovation grant, multiple vendor contracts, all in the last 18 months. He raised his eyebrows. "None of those can be considered valid without your signature. If challenged, they could be voided. He's been acting beyond his legal authority." I laughed, but it came out hollow. All this time they were pushing me out, and they forgot to actually remove me. Michael leaned forward. "They didn't forget. They assumed you wouldn't check, that you'd walk away quietly. They think I'm gone. They think wrong. I felt it again, that heavy silence inside me finally starting to crack. I'd been holding it in for weeks, the anger, the shame, the disbelief. But underneath it all, I'd been gathering facts, memories, receipts. I want to do this right, I said. Not petty, not emotional, but thorough. Michael nodded. Then here's what we do. First, a cease and desist. We notify Arthur and the board that you are the legal owner and that they've been operating under invalid authority. We demand immediate review of all contracts executed without your consent. And then, he smiled, then we decide whether you want to take it back or burn it down. I didn't smile, not yet, but something inside me began to settle. Not vengeance, not even justice, just ownership. Real, tangible ownership. They thought they had pushed me out, but they had built the entire empire on ground they didn't realize still belonged to me, and I was done being polite about it. There's a moment, right before you push a domino, when everything holds still. Not out of fear, not out of hesitation, but because you know, once you start it, there's no undoing it. That's how I felt the morning we sent the letter. Michael had been precise, as always. The legal language was airtight. Every claim backed with documents, dates, filings. But I read it line by line, not like a lawyer, but like someone who had bled for the name printed on that letterhead. I wanted it to be clear. Sharp, but not bitter. Commanding, but not vengeful. The final draft was only 5 pages, but it might as well have been an earthquake. Subject, legal notice, ownership and operational irregularities. Immediate compliance required added only 1 line of my own, near the end. This letter is not an act of retaliation. It is an act of restoration. We sent it at 9 hot a.m. It hit every inbox on the board. The chairman, the financial committee, the compliance officer, Arthur, and Mia, who, despite her new title, was not legally entitled to any executive privilege. We didn't need to wait long. By 9:13, the first read receipt pinged. Then another. And another. At 9:17, my phone rang. A blocked number. I hesitated for only a second before answering. Miranda Tesler? Yes. This is Charles Grenly, Altura Ventures. My breath caught. Charles Grenly was the investor, the one Arthur had spent years trying to woo, the one who led our Series C round, writing the largest check in the company's history. He wasn't calling to exchange pleasantries. I've just read your letter, he said, voice crisp, clipped with disbelief. Please tell me this isn't some kind of misunderstanding. No, I said. It's not. He was silent for a beat. I heard pages flipping, the dull clack of a keyboard. My counsel is reviewing your founding documents now, he said. But I'll be blunt. Arthur never disclosed this. There's no mention of your ownership in any of the filings we received. You're saying none of those contracts had your signature? Correct. He swore quietly under his breath. Then, with the tone of someone recalculating a very expensive decision, he asked, Why are you doing this now? I looked out the window of Michael's office. The city was waking up below us. Coffee carts, taxis, glass towers gleaming in the morning sun. Somewhere in one of those buildings, Arthur was probably pretending everything was still under control. I'm not seeking revenge, I said. I'm restoring justice. Another pause. Then a quiet sigh. You know, Charles said, voice softening, you helped my daughter once. That took me by surprise. 3 years ago, Denver Tech Summit. She was supposed to speak on a panel, first time presenting anything in public. She had a panic attack backstage. You found her, talked to her, stayed until she could breathe again. I remembered. A terrified girl in a gray blazer with a trembling lip and smudged eyeliner. I'd handed her a bottle of water and said, You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be present. She still talks about you, he said. You made her believe she belonged. I said nothing for a moment. My throat tightened unexpectedly. I believe in people like you, Miranda. And I believe in founders who don't need to shout to lead. He took a breath. I'll be calling a special meeting. My legal team will support a full audit. And if what you're saying holds, which frankly it already looks like it does, I will push for immediate correction. This company was built on your name. It's time it remembered that. When the call ended, I just sat there, phone in hand. Not triumphant, not even angry, just still. One message, 5 pages. And suddenly, the truth was loud again. By noon, the cracks were showing. One board member emailed apologetically. We were not made aware of these filings. We would never have endorsed these contracts without full transparency. Another tried to schedule a call. There may be room for negotiation, Miranda. Let's keep this internal. Arthur, of course, remained silent. Mia, however, couldn't resist. Her email was short, passive-aggressive, perfectly on brand. So, this was your plan all along? Impressive, strategic. A little cold, though. I stared at her message, the gall of it, and smiled. Just a little. She thought this was a scheme, that I'd been plotting from the shadows, like some vindictive mastermind. But this wasn't a coup. This was the truth surfacing, finally, undeniably. They had spent months, maybe years, building a new world on top of my work, believing that if they said my name less and less, it would eventually disappear. But they forgot something crucial. Names may fade from walls, but the paper never lies. I wore the same navy suit, the one I'd been wearing the day Arthur stripped me of my title, the one I'd carefully hung in my closet that night, still holding the ghost of that conference room, its cold air, its sterile betrayal. But today, the suit felt different. Not like armor, like truth. At 8:47 a.m., I stepped out of the car in front of the office building I'd once walked into every day with quiet purpose. I stood for a moment at the curb, watching employees stream through the revolving glass doors. Some were new faces. Some were people I'd mentored, now laughing over coffee as if the company had always run this way. Michael waited beside me, his briefcase in one hand, phone in the other. Next to him stood Denise Sharp, a compliance officer from the State Department of Economic Oversight. She was a woman of few words and precise movements, with a reputation for bringing entire C-suites to their knees with nothing more than a clipboard and 5 statutes. The 3 of us walked in together. At the front desk, a receptionist I didn't recognize blinked up at me in confusion. "I'm here to see the board," I said. She stammered something about appointments, clearance, needing to call someone, but Michael calmly handed her a certified letter. One glance at the state seal, and her fingers froze over the keyboard. Her mouth opened, then closed. She picked up the phone and murmured something into it, nodding rapidly. We moved past her without waiting. The building looked the same: polished floors, minimalist decor, branded walls featuring sleek buzzwords like velocity and synergy. But the energy was different. People turned as we walked by. Some stood straighter, some whispered. News travels fast, especially when it's carried in official briefcases. By the time we reached the top floor, the hush had thickened. The conference room was already half full. Arthur stood at the head of the table in a crisp blazer, arms crossed like he was still the undisputed king of a kingdom built on borrowed bricks. Mia sat to his left, expression blank, save for the faintest shadow of worry just behind her eyes. 2 board members were present: David Liu, fidgeting with his pen, and Lillian Reese, who couldn't seem to meet my gaze. I didn't wait for a greeting. I walked in and took the center seat. Michael and Denise flanked me, placing binders on the polished table like war generals laying out a battle plan. I looked directly at Arthur. "Let's begin." He opened his mouth, probably to bluff, to posture, but Denise beat him to it. "Mr. Langford," she said crisply, "this is a formal inquiry. Any statements made will be part of the investigation file. I recommend listening first." Arthur's jaw tightened. Michael opened a binder and began handing out copies of documents: founding papers, original operating agreements, tax filings, investor correspondence, and most damning of all, contract agreements bearing only Arthur's signature. "We have reason to believe," Michael began, "that Mr. Langford has been operating as an executive without legal authority for over a decade. Ms. Tesler remains the sole registered owner and managing member of this company. No documentation exists showing a transfer of ownership. Furthermore, decisions made without her consent, including funding agreements and major hires, constitute a breach of fiduciary duty." Arthur's face paled. "This is absurd," he said. "The board approved." "They were not informed of her status," Michael interrupted smoothly, "which in itself is concealment. You represented yourself as the sole decision-maker when legally you were not." Denise tapped a page with her pen. "You also signed a government grant proposal under penalty of perjury. That's not just an internal issue, that's a legal one." The room went silent. The air tightened like a stretched wire. I watched Arthur's hands. He'd always had steady hands, but now they twitched, just slightly. He looked at me finally. Really looked. There was something in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. Fear. "You're suspending me?" he asked quietly. "No," Denise said. "We are." Michael nodded. "Effective immediately, Mr. Langford's access to company systems, finances, and internal communications is revoked. You are expected to cooperate fully with the audit." Arthur looked around the room like he expected anyone, to protest. No one did. Even Mia remained still. I turned to the board members. "I came back not to retaliate," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I came back because this company lost its compass, because somewhere along the way, loyalty became liability, and the people who built the foundation were pushed into the shadows." I looked at the chair where I'd once been humiliated. I was silenced, erased, discarded, but I never stopped being the owner. And now the silence was mine. I rose to leave. No box in my arms this time, no shame in my step. Just the full weight of the truth, carried evenly on my shoulders. And behind me, Arthur remained frozen, watching the empire he hijacked finally return to its architect. I didn't fire anyone, not Arthur, even though the silence he left behind felt like an echo of the betrayal. Not Mia, despite the casual cruelty of her smile the day I carried my things out of the office. Not the board members who voted me out without questioning the legality of what they were doing. People expected a purge, but I had no interest in becoming the tyrant they tried to make me out to be. I didn't return to flip tables or scream orders. I came back to repair what had been broken, not just in the company, but in myself. I started with the bones. The foundation we laid in Arthur's basement 15 years ago, messy, hopeful, imperfect, was still beneath the glossy glass walls and innovation posters. The vision was never the problem. The problem was that somewhere along the way, vision got confused with vanity. So I peeled everything back. I initiated a full structural review of every department, not to find scapegoats, but to find what we'd lost. I sat down with junior analysts, customer support reps, IT contractors, people no one had asked for input in years, and I listened. I brought in facilitators, not consultants. I didn't want buzzwords. I wanted truth. Within a month, the difference was visible, not just in numbers, but in posture. People began to look up when I walked past, not out of fear or formality, but recognition. They remembered me. Not the title. Me. The woman who used to troubleshoot code at midnight, who passed out protein bars during product sprints, who'd once folded chairs after a strategy meeting because the cleaning staff was short-handed. I reopened the mentorship program I'd built in year 3. The one that got cut in favor of accelerated departmental output. I renamed it quietly, the Tesler Fellowship. It wasn't about legacy. It was about never letting someone like me get erased again. I reached out to those we'd lost. Janelle, who built our original UX system and was sidelined after calling out a male manager's duplicity. Dev, whose early automation scripts saved us 2 full-time salaries, but who was dismissed as too intense for upper management. I called them all, personally, Some said no, but some said yes. They returned quietly, respectfully, and we rebuilt in a way that honored the past but didn't repeat it. As for Arthur, he resigned. No apology, no fanfare, just a private resignation letter with language so vague it could have been written by a robot. I accepted it without ceremony. I didn't need him to grovel, I just needed him gone. Mia stayed. She took the demotion, her pride folded neatly beneath a new title: Director of Operational Strategy. She's talented, no denying that, but now she knows where her brilliance ends and where mine begins. She knows better than to overstep again. And the company? It breathed, like a body recovering from a long illness. Slower at first, cautious, then steadier, stronger. One of the interns asked me once, during a company Q&A, "How did you stay so calm through all of it?" I smiled. I wasn't calm, I was focused. Because that's the truth they never understood. My silence was not surrender, it was strategy. And now, every morning, I walk into the CEO's office, my office, and I close the door, not to shut people out, but to give myself a moment. A pause. A space to breathe and remember. The office isn't flashy. I kept the old furniture. The only thing new is a single framed photo on the wall, a candid shot of our original basement setup, folded chairs, a whiteboard stained with dry erase ghosts. Arthur and me, both grinning, both exhausted, both still hopeful. It reminds me how far we've come. My coffee is always the same, strong, 2 sugars. I drink it slowly now. I don't rush. I don't chase. Because I no longer need to prove anything, not to investors, not to the board, not to Arthur, and definitely not to myself. Once upon a time, they decided I didn't matter. That I was replaceable, invisible, just another quiet woman holding up a world she didn't own. Now they know the truth. I never needed a spotlight. I just needed the keys. And now that I have them, I will never again let anyone determine my worth. Not ever. If I could sit across from you now, 15 years younger, eyes a little brighter, back a little straighter, I wouldn't try to stop what's coming. Not the betrayal, not the boardroom, not even that moment where your name is dismissed, like it was never worth speaking aloud. You needed that storm. You needed to break. Not because you weren't strong enough, but because you had spent so many years holding everything and everyone together. You forgot what your own hands were capable of when you used them for yourself. But there are things I would tell you, if only so you didn't carry the wrong weight as you walked through fire. So listen closely. First, don't confuse being essential with being valued. You thought being the one they always turned to would eventually earn you a seat at the table. That if you worked harder, stayed quiet, fixed problems before anyone even noticed them, one day someone would say, "She should be in charge." But the truth is, people rarely give power to the person who makes things easy for them. They give it to the person who makes noise, the one who takes up space. You made yourself small so others could feel big, and they mistook your grace for weakness. Next time, don't wait to be seen. Stand in your own light, loudly, without apology. Second, your silence was noble, but unsustainable. You told yourself that keeping the peace was the same as building a future, that biting your tongue was professionalism, that letting others shine while you stood back was a mark of character. But silence isn't always strength. Sometimes it's how they bury you. You have a voice. Use it. Early. Often. Don't wait until it becomes your only weapon. Third, keep the records. Not because you plan to fight, but because when everything is stripped away and people pretend your work never existed, the truth will be your last defense. You don't need to threaten anyone, but you do need to protect yourself. And when they say you're being paranoid, smile and document anyway. Fourth, stop proving you're not too much. You are. And that's the point. You are too insightful, too precise, too prepared, too relentless. And that makes people uncomfortable, especially those who succeeded because no one ever challenged them. Let them be uncomfortable. You were not made to fit someone else's definition of digestible. You were made to create, to lead, to change the room just by entering it. And last, maybe most important, when you rise again, and you will, do not become them. Do not use the power you've reclaimed to punish, or diminish, or forget. Use it to rebuild. Let your leadership look nothing like theirs. Bring back the people they ignored. Fund the programs they called non-essential. Celebrate the quiet ones, the introverts, the grinders, the thinkers. Make the room wide enough for people who once had to claw their way through locked doors. Because one day, someone like you will sit where you sat, and they'll wonder if anyone ever stood up for someone like them. Be the reason they know the answer is yes. You don't need to rage. You don't need to shout. You just need to own it, fully, finally. The title, the office, the vision, the truth. You were never just the glue. You were the blueprint, the scaffolding, the steel. And when they tried to push you out, they forgot that the foundation still had your name carved into its bones. Let them build their towers, but never again let them forget whose ground they're standing on. With pride and peace, Miranda.